Over the past few years, the American housing market turned into something almost unrecognizable. Home prices didn't just climb steadily, they exploded into territory that left buyers, economists, and even sellers stunned. Cities that were once considered affordable became battlegrounds where cash offers flew in minutes, and everyday families found themselves priced out of their own neighborhoods. Investors bought homes sight unseen. Bidding wars became the norm, and the dream of homeownership slipped further away from millions. But 2025 is telling a completely different story. The frenzy has collapsed. The momentum has reversed. And in cities across the country, home prices aren't just stabilizing. They're plummeting at speeds that would have seemed impossible just 2 years ago. Properties that commanded top dollar are now sitting vacant, slashed to prices that feel like they're from another decade. Sellers who once held all the leverage are now desperate for any reasonable offer. Investors who stretch themselves thin are scrambling to unload properties before losses pile even higher. And buyers who were locked out for years are finally seeing opportunity creep back into the conversation. If you want to stay ahead of the biggest housing shifts happening right now, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what's unfolding in these 12 cities could reshape the entire real estate landscape for the next generation. Let's dive in. Number 12. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge never made headlines during the housing boom, and that's precisely why its collapse feels so jarring. This capital city spent years quietly growing, drawing families with its mix of southern charm, decent jobs tied to energy and education, and housing that felt attainable compared to cities on the coasts. But by 2025, the market has buckled. Home prices have dropped roughly 9% year over year, and inventory is stacking up faster than buyers can absorb. Properties that were expected to sell within weeks are now lingering for months, collecting price cuts like scars. Subdivisions on the outskirts of town that were built with optimism during the pandemic are now half filled, with builders offering steep discounts just to move units off the books. The energy sector, long the backbone of Baton Rouge's economy, has been hit hard by layoffs and cost cutting. Petrochemical plants that once provided stable, high-paying work are scaling back operations, and the ripple effect is hitting every corner of the housing market. Fewer workers means fewer buyers, and fewer buyers means falling prices. Even Louisiana State University, a major economic anchor, hasn't been able to prop things up. Enrollment has softened, and the influx of faculty and staff that once sustained neighborhoods around campus has slowed to a trickle. Real estate agents who used to juggle multiple offers are now sitting through open houses with no visitors at all. Sellers are cutting asking prices by tens of thousands, yet interest remains painfully thin. Investors who scooped up rental properties during the boom are now facing a double bind, falling home values and rising vacancy rates. Many are quietly listing their holdings, hoping to escape before the market slides further. Number 11. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa rode a wave of attention during the remote work explosion. The city marketed itself as an affordable haven for digital nomads, even launching programs that paid people to relocate. For a brief moment, it seemed like the strategy was working. Home prices ticked upward, new developments broke ground, and optimism filled the air. But that momentum has evaporated. By 2025, home prices in Tulsa have fallen about 11%, and the market feels like it's in freefall. Neighborhoods that were hot just 2 years ago are now dotted with for sale signs that never seem to come down. Price reductions are constant, and sellers are accepting offers they would have laughed at in 2022. The remote work wave that fueled Tulsa's brief surge has largely receded. Companies that embraced flexibility during the pandemic have tightened policies, calling employees back to offices or cutting positions entirely. Many of the transplants who moved to Tulsa for its low cost of living have either relocated again or returned to their original cities, leaving behind homes they can't sell without taking losses. And Tulsa's local economy, heavily tied to oil and gas, hasn't been strong enough to fill the gap. Energy prices have been volatile, and the industry's uncertainty has translated directly into housing instability. Developments on the north side of town, areas that were supposed to represent Tulsa's revitalization, are now struggling to attract buyers. Builders are slashing prices, offering upgrades for free, and in some cases, simply walking away from projects that no longer make financial sense. Foreclosures are ticking upward as homeowners who bought at peak prices find themselves underwater, owing more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. Real estate investors who bet on Tulsa's upward trajectory are now stuck holding properties that generate negative cash flow. Number 10. Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland's housing market has always been defined by its blue-collar roots and modest expectations. It was never the flashiest city, never the one investors rushed toward with dreams of fast returns. But that steady, predictable nature made it appealing to a certain kind of buyer, people looking for affordability and stability. By 2025, even that foundation is cracking. Home prices have slid about 10%, and the decline shows no sign of slowing. Entire blocks on the east side sit filled with homes that have been listed, relisted, and reduced multiple times. Sellers are offering to cover closing costs, throwing in appliances, even offering cash incentives, yet buyers remain hesitant. The issue isn't just supply, it's confidence. Cleveland's population has been shrinking for decades, and that trend hasn't reversed. Younger generations are leaving for cities with more opportunities, and the ones who remain often can't afford to buy even at reduced prices. Jobs in manufacturing, once the lifeblood of the region, continue to disappear as automation advances and companies relocate operations elsewhere. Neighborhoods that were once thriving working-class communities are now struggling with vacancy and blight. Homes that sold for $150,000 during the brief post-pandemic bump are now listed under $110,000 with little interest. Suburban areas like Parma and Lakewood, traditionally seen as safer bets, are experiencing similar downturns. Homeowners who plan to retire and cash out their equity are finding that their homes are worth far less than expected, trapping them in place. Investors who bought rental properties in bulk are now facing a harsh reality. Tenants are harder to find, maintenance costs are rising, and property values are sinking. Some are simply abandoning homes rather than continuing to pour money into a losing proposition. Number 9. Rochester, New York. Rochester used to be a symbol of American industrial might. Kodak, Xerox, Bausch, and Lomb. These were names that defined the city and provided generations of stable, middle-class jobs. But those days are long gone, and the housing market is paying the price. By 2025, home prices in Rochester have dropped roughly 12%, one of the steepest declines in the Northeast. Properties that once represented solid investments are now seen as liabilities. Sellers are slashing prices, and even then, homes sit on the market for months without serious offers. The core problem is economic stagnation. Rochester's population has been declining for decades, and the job market hasn't evolved quickly enough to replace what was lost. The university and hospital systems provide some stability, but they aren't enough to sustain a healthy housing market. Younger professionals who graduate from the University of Rochester often leave for cities with better opportunities, draining the area of the demographic most likely to buy homes. Neighborhoods on the north and west sides, areas that were already struggling, have been hit hardest. Foreclosures are climbing, and entire streets are lined with vacant homes falling into disrepair. Suburban towns like Irondequoit and Greece, once considered desirable middle-class enclaves, are now seeing their own declines. Homeowners who bought in the early 2000s are finding that their properties have barely appreciated and in many cases have lost value. Investors who tried to capitalize on Rochester's low prices are now realizing that cheap doesn't always mean profitable. Rental demand is weak, tenant turnover is high, and property taxes remain stubbornly elevated. Many are quietly exiting the market, selling at losses just to move on. Number 8. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit's story has been told countless times. The rise, the fall, the attempted comeback. After hitting rock bottom in the years following the financial crisis, the city saw glimmers of recovery. Downtown revitalization projects brought new energy. Young professionals and artists moved into neighborhoods like Corktown and Midtown, drawn by cheap real estate and a sense of possibility. But by 2025, that comeback narrative has stalled. Home prices have dropped about 13% in the past year, and the market feels fragile once again. The optimism that fueled Detroit's resurgence has collided with harsh economic realities. The auto industry, still the region's economic engine, is undergoing painful transitions. The shift to electric vehicles has meant layoffs, plant closures, and uncertainty for tens of thousands of workers. And when auto workers struggle, the entire metro area feels it. Neighborhoods that were showing signs of life are now backsliding. Homes that were renovated and flipped during the recovery are sitting unsold, their asking prices slashed repeatedly. Investors who bet on Detroit's turnaround are now sitting on properties that generate little to no return. Rental income has softened, maintenance costs have climbed, and the dream of steady appreciation has evaporated. Suburban areas like Warren, Dearborn, and Southfield are also caught in the downturn. These were never glamorous markets, but they were stable. Now, even that stability is in question. Foreclosures are rising, and homes that were once family anchors are being sold at auction for fractions of their original value. The broader issue is population loss. Detroit's metro area continues to shrink as people leave for opportunities elsewhere. Without a growing population, housing demand can't sustain itself. Number 7, Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis has always marched to its own rhythm, a city steeped in music, culture, and a complex history. But its housing market has struggled for years, and 2025 is shaping up to be one of the toughest chapters yet. Home prices have fallen roughly 11%, and inventory is piling up faster than buyers can consider it. Properties that were once snapped up by investors looking for affordable rental income are now sitting vacant, relisted week after week with deeper and deeper cuts. The issues plaguing Memphis are layered. Crime remains a persistent concern, deterring both buyers and investors. Neighborhoods that might otherwise be attractive are avoided due to safety fears, real or perceived. Schools in many parts of the city struggle with funding and performance, pushing families toward suburbs or out of the region entirely. And the job market, while not in total collapse, hasn't been strong enough to support rising home ownership. Wages remain low compared to national averages, and many residents simply can't afford to buy even as prices fall. Areas like Fraser, Whitehaven, and parts of North Memphis have seen some of the steepest declines. Homes that were already inexpensive are now selling for amounts that seem almost symbolic. Investors who bought in bulk hoping to profit from rental income are now bleeding cash as tenants become harder to find and properties require constant repairs. Foreclosures are climbing, and many owners are simply walking away rather than continuing to fight a losing battle. Suburban markets like Germantown and Collierville, traditionally seen as safe havens, are not immune either. Prices there have softened as well, and homes that used to sell quickly are now sitting on the market far longer than expected. Number 6, Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore's housing market has been fragile for years, and 2025 has pushed it into serious decline. Home prices have dropped about 14%, one of the sharpest falls on the East Coast. Entire neighborhoods are littered with vacant row houses, properties that were once family homes now sitting empty and decaying. The city's population has been shrinking steadily, and the housing market has become a mirror of that exodus. Crime, poverty, and lack of economic opportunity have driven residents away, and those who remain often lack the means to buy. The pandemic brought a brief flicker of interest as some remote workers considered Baltimore for its proximity to Washington, D.C. and lower costs. But that interest faded quickly once reality set in. Neighborhoods like West Baltimore, East Baltimore, and parts of South Baltimore have seen prices collapse to levels that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Homes are selling for under $50,000, and even at those prices, buyers are hard to find. Investors who tried to capitalize on Baltimore's distress are now facing their own crises. Rental properties require constant maintenance, tenant issues are common, and property taxes remain high, despite falling values. Many are quietly abandoning their investments, leaving behind more vacancy and blight. Suburban areas like Towson and Catonsville have fared slightly better, but even those markets are softening. Homeowners expecting to sell and move are finding that their equity has vanished, leaving them stuck or forced to sell at a loss. The city's economic challenges are profound. Jobs are leaving, schools are underfunded, and infrastructure is crumbling. Number 5, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham spent years trying to reinvent itself, shedding its industrial past and positioning itself as a hub for healthcare, education, and Southern charm. For a while, it seemed to be working. Home prices ticked upward, new developments appeared, and the city felt like it was finding its footing. But by 2025, that progress has reversed sharply. Home prices have fallen about 12%, and the market is flooded with inventory that no one seems interested in buying. Subdivisions on the outskirts of town that were built during the optimistic early 2020s are now half empty, with builders desperately cutting prices to move homes. The local economy hasn't been able to sustain the housing market's brief growth. Jobs in healthcare and education provide some stability, but they don't generate the kind of income needed to support rising home prices. Wages in Birmingham remain below national averages, and many residents are priced out even as costs fall. Neighborhoods like Ensley, Woodlawn, and parts of the West Side have been hit hardest. Homes that were already affordable are now selling for remarkably low prices, yet buyers remain scarce. Investors who thought Birmingham represented hidden value are now stuck with properties that generate minimal returns and require constant attention. Suburban markets like Hoover and Vestavia Hills, traditionally seen as the stable, desirable areas, are also experiencing declines. Homes that used to sell within weeks are now sitting for months, and sellers are making concession after concession just to attract interest. Foreclosures are ticking upward as homeowners who bought during the brief price surge find themselves underwater. Number 4. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee's housing market was never flashy, but it was steady. Blue-collar families, generational home ownership, and a strong manufacturing base kept the market functional if not exciting. But by 2025, that steadiness has crumbled. Home prices have dropped roughly 13%, and the decline is accelerating. Properties that once represented working-class stability are now seen as risky investments. Sellers are slashing prices, offering incentives, and still finding few serious buyers. The manufacturing sector, Milwaukee's economic backbone, has been devastated by automation, outsourcing, and shifting consumer demand. Plants that once employed thousands are now operating with skeleton crews or have shut down entirely. The ripple effect has been brutal. Fewer jobs mean fewer buyers, and fewer buyers mean a collapsing housing market. Neighborhoods on the north and south sides have been hit hardest. Homes that sold for $120,000 just a few years ago are now listed under $80,000 with little interest. Investors who bought rental properties in bulk are now facing negative cash flow as tenants become harder to find and maintenance costs climb. Many are simply walking away, adding to the growing inventory of vacant homes. Suburban areas like West Allis and Wauwatosa have also softened. These were traditionally stable middle-class markets, but even they're experiencing price drops and longer days on market. Homeowners expecting to sell and move are finding that their equity has evaporated, leaving them trapped or forced to accept losses. The broader issue is demographic. Milwaukee's population is aging, and younger generations are leaving for cities with more economic opportunity. Without a growing population of buyers, the housing market can't sustain itself. Number 3. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis has struggled with housing for years, but 2025 has brought a new level of distress. Home prices have plummeted about 15%, one of the steepest declines in the Midwest. Entire neighborhoods are filled with homes that have been listed, reduced, and relisted without success. Sellers are desperate, buyers are scarce, and the market feels like it's in freefall. The core issue is population loss. St. Louis has been shedding residents for decades, and the trend shows no sign of reversing. Younger people leave for cities with better opportunities, and the ones who remain often lack the financial means to buy homes. The job market, while not completely collapsed, hasn't been strong enough to support a healthy housing sector. Wages are low, opportunities are limited, and optimism is in short supply. Neighborhoods like North St. Louis, parts of South City, and areas near downtown have seen catastrophic declines. Homes are selling for under $30,000, and even at those prices, many sit vacant. Investors who tried to profit from St. Louis's distress are now abandoning properties en masse. Rental demand is weak, maintenance costs are high, and the hoped-for appreciation has turned into steep depreciation. Suburban areas like Florissant, Ferguson, and University City have also been pulled into the downturn. These were once solid middle-class markets, but they're now experiencing their own declines as buyers disappear. Foreclosures are rising steadily, and entire streets are lined with homes that have been repossessed and are now owned by banks that don't know what to do with them. Number 2. Gary, Indiana. Gary represents the extreme end of America's housing collapse. Once a booming steel town that symbolized industrial prosperity, it's now a shell of its former self. By 2025, home prices have fallen to almost nothing. Properties that were once worth six figures are now selling for under $10,000, and even at those prices, buyers are nearly impossible to find. The city's population has collapsed from over 170,000 at its peak to under 70,000 today, and the trend continues. Entire blocks are abandoned. Homes sit vacant, windows boarded, roofs caving in. The steel industry that built Gary has long since disappeared, and nothing has replaced it. Jobs are scarce, crime is rampant, and the city's infrastructure is crumbling. Schools are closing, services are being cut, and residents who can leave are doing so. Neighborhoods like Midtown, the Glen Park area, and parts of the Miller Beach community, once thriving, are now dotted with abandoned homes that no one wants. Investors who thought they could buy dirt cheap and profit have been burned repeatedly. There's no rental demand, no appreciation, and constant costs tied to taxes and maintenance. Many have simply walked away, leaving homes to decay. The suburban areas that ring Gary, places like Merrillville and Hobart, have managed to avoid total collapse, but they're not thriving either. The stigma of proximity to Gary has weighed them down, and property values there have softened as well. In 2025, Gary is a haunting example of what happens when an economy collapses and never recovers. The housing market isn't just falling, it's disappeared. Homes have become effectively worthless, and the city itself is fading from the American landscape. For those who remain, the falling prices offer no relief, only a reminder of what's been lost. Number 1. Detroit suburbs, Michigan. While Detroit itself has faced ongoing struggles, it's the surrounding suburbs that are experiencing the most shocking collapse in 2025. Cities like Pontiac, Inkster, Southgate, and Taylor, areas that were once stable working-class communities, have seen home prices plummet by 16% or more in just a year. These weren't markets that grabbed headlines during the boom, and their collapse has been largely ignored. But the scale of the decline is staggering. Homes that sold for $180,000 in 2022 are now listed under $120,000 with no buyers in sight. The auto industry's painful transition to electric vehicles has devastated these communities. Plant closures, layoffs, and automation have gutted the employment base that sustained these towns for generations. Workers who bought homes expecting stable careers are now facing unemployment and foreclosure. The ripple effect has been catastrophic. Local businesses are closing, schools are losing funding, and entire neighborhoods feel like they're in decline. Investors who bought rental properties in these suburbs during the brief recovery are now stuck with negative cash flow. Tenants are harder to find, many can't afford rent, and properties require constant repairs. Foreclosures are spiking, and banks are repossessing homes they have no idea how to sell. Subdivisions that were built in the 1980s and 1990s, communities that represented the American dream for countless families, are now filled with for sale signs that never come down. Sellers are making concession after concession, but buyers simply aren't there. The economic foundation has crumbled, and without jobs, there's no housing market. In 2025, Detroit's suburbs represent the most dramatic housing collapse in the country. These aren't cities that were overbuilt or overhyped. They were steady, unglamorous, working-class communities. And their fall is a reminder that when the jobs disappear, everything else follows. The collapse here isn't temporary, it's structural, and recovery feels like a distant dream. Across the country, a fundamental shift is taking place. The housing market that seemed unstoppable just a few years ago has reversed course in ways few saw coming. Prices that soared beyond reason are now crashing back to earth, and the cities bearing the brunt of the decline are learning painful lessons about speculation, economic dependency, and the limits of growth. For buyers who were priced out during the frenzy, falling prices might seem like opportunity. But in many of these cities, the declines aren't signs of health. They're symptoms of deeper distress. Jobs are disappearing, populations are shrinking, and entire regional economies are struggling to find footing. The question isn't just whether prices will stabilize, it's whether these markets can survive at all. Some will recover. Others will continue to hollow out, becoming cautionary tales of what happens when the economic engine stops and nothing replaces it. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective on where the housing market is headed, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because the story is far from over. What's happening in these 12 cities is just the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that will reshape how Americans think about home ownership, investment, and the places they choose to call home. The numbers don't lie, and right now, they're telling a story most people didn't see coming.